Dr. Ramani is on Diary of a CEO. This podcast has been a favorite of mine for a really long time, and the timing of this could not be any more perfect. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If not, welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through Dr. Ramani's interview with Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO. I'm going to be highlighting some of what I believe to be Dr. Ramani's most important points, all while adding in some of my own insight as someone who was raised in a narcissistic family. Let's get into it.
We believe 1 in 6 people are narcissistic, and exposure can become a life or death situation. But the key step to identify narcissism is
Dr. Ramani Javasala,
licensed clinical psychologist,
the world's leading expert on narcissism. All narcissism's on a spectrum. At the lowest ends, it's Instagram saviors. But the severe end of the spectrum, you're talking about a cult leader. They have low empathy. They will dominate people. They have to get the last word. They get angry very quickly. And that's just the top of the iceberg.
What about the impacts of narcissism on relationships?
Narcissistic people, they can go out in the world and they're able to be charming and charismatic, and narcissistic relationships start strong. They want to get you quick, and then it becomes dismissiveness, manipulation, gaslighting. The world thinks this person's fantastic. A lot of people say, aren't you lucky that you're married to that guy? And behind closed doors, they psychologically destroy you.
Narcissism in work. How do I know if my boss is a narcissist?
You're going to feel it in the sense of you don't feel seen, you don't feel valued, you feel like the workplace is unpredictable, you might even feel that it's psychologically unsafe.
What about world leaders? If our adversary in another country is a narcissist, would we rather our leader be a narcissist as well?
That's a fantastic question. And I think...
So, the big question, how do you know if you are a narcissist? And can you cure narcissism?
So here's where we get into some interesting muddy waters.
Dr. Ramani, you've committed so much of your life and your energy to the subject of narcissism. Why does it matter?
Oh, it matters so much because exposure to people who have narcissistic personalities shapes how people's identity develops, shapes how their personality develops, or if the first time you encounter a narcissistic person is in adulthood, it can actually sort of hijack that sense of identity. It can really steal a person away from themselves. And I think it's so important because we haven't given ourselves permission, I think as a culture, as a field of mental health, to identify this as a problem and allow people to have better responses. In a way, it's almost viewed as sort of not being very nice to say the narcissistic people are not very nice. It's a strange paradox in the world of mental health. That's why I do it, because nothing more than me wanting to return people back to their authentic selves.
So how many patients do you think you've seen that have been victims of narcissists?
I mean, hundreds, really. And I even use the word survivor. I hate to call them victims because I don't even think they're that passive. I mean, I think that they just weren't, no one ever taught anyone this, right? I'll give you the example. When people are in a relationship with somebody who's living with addiction, it's very clear what they're dealing with, right? You have a person, they're using a substance that's altering them, that's altering their behavior, that's taking them away from who they are. People in relationships with addicts will say, I'm in 2 relationships. I'm in a relationship with a sober person, and I'm in a relationship with somebody who's using or intoxicated or denying or defending their use, right? 2 people. And it breaks the people in those relationships. And we're willing to call it that. The experience people have in narcissistic relationships in a way is no different, with the added bit though, that at least with addiction, people can say, I see what the behavior is. I see what the issue is. Addiction's a disease and we know it's treatable. Narcissism, not so much. And on top of that, the narcissistic person has this very well-developed, very successful behavioral repertoire. They can go out in the world and they're able to be charming and charismatic and confident and smart and the center of attention and running companies. And behind closed doors, they psychologically eviscerate the people they're with. Spouses, partners, family members, close friends, maybe people who are below them in an organization, people where they can kind of get away with it. So the people they're harming, the world thinks this person's fantastic. At least a person who's in a relationship with an addict, people say, okay, I get it. They're using, this is hard. But for the folks in narcissistic relationships, a lot of people say, Aren't you lucky that you're married to that guy?
When you are growing up in that kind of environment, that is the only kind of behavior that you've been exposed to more often than not. And externally, sort of on the surface, all of these other people in your life, whether it's other family members or people in your school or different organizations, other adults in your life, sort of authority figures, might be telling you, oh, your parents are so great because they're so involved, they volunteer their time, they're charming, they're charismatic. And so behind closed doors, you're experiencing all of this toxicity, and you're being made to feel like a bad person for being upset about experiencing those kind of things. All the while, this really positive narrative is being reinforced not only by your narcissistic parent, but by other people in your life, other adults. And it makes it that much more confusing because you don't understand why on the inside this feels really negative, and yet people are telling you how lucky you are to be in the situation that you're in.
How can you tell the difference between someone having a bad day, an asshole, and a narcissist? Because some of those things there, I thought, yeah, on a bad day, I might do that.
Yeah.
The whole collection together, no. But on a bad day when I haven't slept, okay, do you know what? I might blame someone or whatever else. What's the distinction?
When a person has a bad day, and we all have bad days, and on those bad days, we might look, if the only tape someone had of us was of that day, ooh, right? But here's the piece. When people are not narcissistic and they have bad days, they will take accountability, they will make amends, and they will change their behavior and say, I'm not doing this again. This is not okay. Why wasn't it okay? Because it was none of those people's fault. You didn't get enough sleep. And whether that means we reach deeper to be as kind as we can to the people, in some cases, especially if it's people we know or we see, again, you may not know the random person at the gym, but if someone we know or work with, we step out of ourselves to say, the way I conducted myself yesterday wasn't okay, and I'm really sorry about that. And so that they're having that experience of you taking accountability. That's where I know we're not dealing with a narcissistic person. We're dealing with a bad day. And a bad day is just that, a day. It's not every day. With a narcissistic person, many days, I'm not going to say all, but many days are characterized by these machinations, these manipulations, and these invalidations. The person in a relationship with a narcissistic person feels like they're constantly on their back foot, that they can't be themselves. They can't express a need. They can't express a want. They can't even express a feeling for fear of it being shut down.
That is one of the telltale signs of narcissism for sure, is the consistency of the behavior along with the lack of accountability. And I think that's why it's so exhausting for people who are either in a relationship with a narcissist or are growing up with a narcissistic parent. I've described it before as feeling like you're always performing, like you can never fully be yourself or kind of let your guard down out of fear that something that you say or do might not sit well with the narcissist in your life and prompt a negative reaction. So you're always on edge, you're always kind of walking on eggshells, and it's the consistency of that really unhealthy behavior that I think differentiates someone from just having a bad day to someone who displays certain narcissistic tendencies.
Can you cure narcissism, in your opinion?
No, I don't, because I think that would imply changing a personality, which I don't think we can do.
I think that is one of the reasons that so many of us make the decision ultimately to go no contact, because we maybe want to make amends. We want to move forward in this relationship, whether it's with a partner or a parent, in a healthy, substantial way. But if the other half of the equation isn't able or willing to change, then there's really not too much we can do without sacrificing too much of our own mental well-being.
Okay, so these other types of narcissism, you named 4 types there. Grandiose narcissism.
Right. So that's our traditional sort of garden variety narcissism, the showy, charismatic, pretentious, preening, charming, attention-seeking, actually quite often quite successful narcissistic person. Unlike the vulnerable narcissists who are failure to launch, the grandiose narcissistic people often have big, big dreams and they'll execute. Not always, and they'll often burn bridges because they are, in fact, narcissistic. So they'll anger people or do shady deals or cut people out and all that stuff. But the grandiose narcissistic folks are often the larger than life folks. Now, if they are angry at you, if they feel let down by you, they will let you know. They can be very vindictive. They are not going to be very honest in a relationship. They're probably going to betray you. They're going to be mean to their partners. We can count on that too. But to the world at large, larger than life. That's the typical model. Now, the vulnerable narcissist is what I just shared with you. That more vulnerable, victimized, socially anxious, angry, aggrieved, sullen, resentful, failure to launch narcissist, okay? Some people would argue they're one and the same, that as long as a grandiose narcissistic person is well supplied, things are going well, they're getting lots of attention, they're making money, they're just sort of feeling like they're the person, they're good, then they're going to stay in their grandiose mode. However, if the thing tips and everything goes wrong for the grandiose narcissist, they lose the money, they lose the job, they lose the partner, they lose social status, the vulnerable stuff will start showing up. The victimhood, the resentment, this is a witch hunt, everyone's out to get me. It can almost feel sort of low-grade paranoid. You're either more one than another. So the vulnerable narcissist could definitely have a grandiose moment if everything turned for them. But some people are just more grandiose. Some people are more vulnerable, but they do have the other underbelly.
It makes so much sense, what she just said. And it's one of the really confusing things, again, about dealing with any kind of a narcissist, is that depending on the mood that you catch them in, depending on what's going on in their lives at the time, that will have a significant impact on whatever it is that you bring to them. I remember reflecting on my own experience growing up, and there were times when I would go to my narcissistic parent to ask permission to do something that I was looking forward to if I got an opportunity. And depending on how things were going for them in their life at that time, that would dictate their reaction. And at one point throughout my healing journey, I was kind of prompted to reflect on these moments. And it brought to the surface this idea that maybe they were a little resentful towards me, because if they wanted to do something throughout their life that now they're feeling kind of low, they're reflecting, oh, I never got the chance to do this, so now you're not going to get the opportunity to do this thing either. It didn't necessarily matter that I was their kid and that most parents would want their kids to have a better life and more opportunities than them. It was much more personal. It was much more self-centered, sort of textbook narcissist behavior.
That's how that looks. Now, the malignant narcissist, which is another type I talked about, this is where we see the most severe form. And that when I say most severe in terms of how it shows up in relationships, I'd say the most problematic form of narcissism. And here's where we see a form of narcissism that shows up as manipulativeness, exploitativeness, the willingness to take advantage of people, coerciveness, isolation, using menace as a tool of control, very vindictive, dangerous. It could be quite dangerous. This is why I always say malignant narcissism is the last stop on the train before you hit psychopathy station, because this is as close to psychopathy as you're going to get without it being psychopathy. And in fact, there's a personality model called the dark tetrad. And the dark tetrad is comprised of narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, which is sort of like that willingness to use other people for your own advantage, and sadism. I personally think there should be a fifth bit, which is paranoia, because I think these folks can be really think everyone's out to get them. But the model right now is those four pieces, right? Malignant narcissism has a lot of those top notes: the calculated, callous coldness, the shallow charm, the shallow superficial charm, intelligence, the lack of empathy, in some ways getting some pleasure out of seeing someone who wronged them being hurt. So again, it feels more dangerous. And that's malignant narcissism.
What kind of people do narcissists attract in relationships, and what kind of people are attracted to narcissists?
So it's such a good question. I'm so glad you asked it. What kind of people do they attract? Everyone's attracted to narcissistic people. They're charming, they're charismatic, they're confident. And research has shown they're often rated as more attractive than other people. They take good care of their bodies. They know lots of interesting things. They're so concerned about hip cred that they know the cool restaurants. All of us have been indoctrinated to think that these are the people we're supposed to be dating, right? Who says no to charm, charisma, and attractiveness? Me, maybe, but just about nobody else would do that. So we're all attracted to them, right? And even with the vulnerable narcissistic folks, you'll say, really? Someone's going to be attracted to sullen and resentful? Well, that's not how they come off when you first meet them. Many times a vulnerable narcissistic person looks like a vulnerable child who needs to be rescued. So if you like rescuing people or or puppies or any small vulnerable creature, that's going to seem actually very attractive to you. So we're all attracted to them. What are they attracted to in us? What they're attracted to in us is our supply. Now, supply can mean different things to different narcissistic folks. Classical sorts of supply are we attractive? If we're attractive, if we have some form of social status, if we have resource, if we have connections, the things that would get them supply. Here's where it gets wonky. Because the question, attractiveness is what attracts people. It's almost the wrong question. The more deep question is what gets people stuck in narcissistic relationships. Because narcissistic relationships start strong. These are people who are running their fastest miles in the beginning of the marathon. Like they're just like, go. And these can often feel like a fairy tale. It's glamorous and it's exciting and the dates are really interesting and they're very attuned. They may be very attentive. They focus on you and they figure what's going to work for you. If they really want to keep you close, they want to get you and they want to get you quick because then you're like a butterfly under glass. Then they've got you captured. Because after all this good stuff happens, you've bought in. You might even be dubious for a while saying, oh, seems too good to be true, or I don't know. But then people, I always say it's somewhere between 6 weeks and 6 months, the devaluing stage starts. And then they've got you, right? And you might get the passive aggressive digs, the minimizations, the lack of empathy, the withdrawing, the withholding. And people will say, where did that first 6 weeks go to? Like, wait a minute, we had such a good time. And as the devaluing begins, people start to blame themselves.
So can you imagine how confusing that might be for a child who's being raised by a narcissistic parent to have this person, this authority figure, their primary caretaker, who can be so charming and charismatic and figure out, okay, what is it that my kid really likes that I can use so that we can bond, so that we can feel like we have a really strong connection, right? And that they can look to me as a parent, as a friend, as kind of like this ideal figure, because then I'll have them and then they'll be willing to do whatever it is to provide that narcissistic supply for me. And I think an added level of complexity that's kind of brought in when you're talking about a parent-child relationship is that the child for so many years doesn't have the ability to leave that relationship. Whereas someone who's dating a narcissist, maybe once they become aware of it, they're a full-grown adult, they're probably supporting themselves, they've got a job, they have the ability to kind of remove themselves from that relationship and move on. But as a kid in that kind of environment, one, you don't really understand the behavior that you're being exposed to and how incredibly unhealthy it is. But two, even if you start to feel some negative repercussions from that behavior, you're not in a position to leave, to remove yourself. And so you have to endure that behavior for a certain amount of time. And I think what's so common is when you endure that same behavior, all you can do is start to rationalize it. And so that behavior becomes normal for you. And by the time you're in a position where you're able to remove yourself, maybe you're 18, 19, you're going away to school, you've got a job, you can move out, right? You're considered an adult. That behavior already feels so normal. It's seamlessly sort of integrated itself into your life to the point that you no longer even know that it's unhealthy and that you should expect different behavior, better, healthier behavior from other people.
So people who are more empathic, more forgiving, more optimistic, these are the kinds of people who get stuck because they're making allowances for this. They're saying, I mean, they were lovely and they did say they're having a really stressful time at work, but their behavior is consistently dismissive and rude. And so you keep making excuses. But then there's a few good days sprinkled in there.
So one of the interesting things is a lot of people are trying to figure out if their partners are narcissists. Do people in relationships, especially long-term relationships, tend to know that they're dating a narcissist? Or is the narcissist gaslighted them to the point that they don't know?
Until recently, most people did not know because it feels like a disloyal thing to know about your partner. Many people say, I love my partner. We have built a life together. There are enough good days that leave them thinking like, there's something here. They're confused. People in these relationships are confused. They're They blame themselves for everything that goes wrong. They're walking on eggshells. They've, in essence, modified themselves to be exactly what the narcissistic partner wants. But it's a slow burn. It's a very slow process of indoctrination. I always say these relationships are death by 1,000 cuts because it just, each of these things happens slowly over time. It's almost as though one day you wake up and you're like, who am I? Like, what have I become? I'm literally like living in service to this other person. It's only in the last 10 years, I'd say, that there's so much more content and the internet is more robust with making this. And I'm sure people type it in. My partner has no empathy and is really entitled and yells at me a lot. Bing! And the narcissism pops out at you. I think this really created the revolution of people saying, what is this? And even when I wrote Should I Stay or Should I Go? That was 2015, I think it was. We were still in the beginning phases. There were just maybe about a dozen books out there taking this on. And so as more information gets out there, more people are clear that this is happening in their relationships. The hope is the earlier you identify it, the less indoctrinated, the less what we call trauma bonded you become. And then the easier it would be to make clear-headed decisions about how you want to proceed.
I think that's one of the really important parts of why I made the decision to start sharing my experience online. Because everything that I talk about, with everything that I post, every idea that I have or video that I make, I think about how younger me, maybe 13, 14-year-old me, would have reacted if I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw a video describing something hurtful that I had experienced that I, up until that point, had perceived as normal. How would that have helped me in the moment? And I say it a lot when I talk about things like this, but knowledge is power. And if you can recognize that the behavior that you're on the receiving end of, whether it's from a partner or a parent, is unhealthy and it's not personal, that I think allows you to let go of a lot of that guilt, to not take those things to heart and to understand, I don't deserve this kind of behavior. And this isn't something that I should expect from other people in my life. This is kind of a unique instance, right? And I'm in this situation for however long it might be, but once I'm out of it, I no longer have to endure it. And so for so many of us who were raised by narcissistic parents, it might not be right away that we're able to remove ourselves from that environment. But what we can do, which might be really helpful, is arm ourselves with information, is to understand what narcissism looks like, what are the different characteristics, the traits to look out for. And once you have a better understanding of what that is, that can help you to kind of pinpoint what's healthy and what's unhealthy about your relationship with your parent. And I think that'll allow you to not get stuck in that cycle where you go from being raised by a narcissistic parent to then maybe having a narcissistic partner. You're sort of clear on what your boundaries are, and you no longer feel like you are the reason for this negative behavior, like you're causing something negative. You understand that it's more a them problem than a you problem.
Talk about the 3 R's that are the hallmarks of negative relationships in your books. What are the 3 R's?
So the first is rumination, okay? That the rumination is, it's an obsessive thinking about the relationship. And it's usually in an attempt to either say, what did I do wrong? What happened? What is going on? It's a trying to fix it.
So these are the 3 things that someone that's in a relationship with a narcissist will do.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, they do a lot more, but these are 3 common ones. So the rumination is a hallmark characteristic of a person in a narcissistic relationship. In essence, you're just trying to make sense of something that makes no sense. The next R is regret. And that regret links to bigger themes like grief. People having regret that this is the parent I have, and I will never have a close, loving relationship with them. The regret that this is the marriage I created and my children will never get a healthy model of marriage. The regret that I've spent 20 years in this relationship and really all I have to show for it is a whole lot of nothing except that it's harmed me. So the regrets play out even big ways and even small ways. Like, why did I say that? Why didn't I say it that way? And then the last R is, it's really euphoric recall, the R being for recall. By euphoric recall, I mean that people in narcissistic relationships have an uncanny ability to sort of cherry pick the good things that happen in the relationship to keep rationalizing it and justifying it to themselves. So they might be in a narcissistic relationship where the person has really treated them heinously for a month. But on one day of that month, the narcissistic person, when they went to the grocery store, for the first time, remember to bring home 2 muffins so that you could have a muffin. And the person's like, They brought me home the best blueberry muffin. Wasn't that thoughtful? They brought me home a muffin. We had muffins together. So the euphoric recall is the over focus on those good experiences as a way, in essence, to create this sort of psychological buy-in so then you can maintain the status quo. For people in narcissistic relationships, it's not as though they're waking up saying, this is a hellscape, I want to get out. They're getting up saying, I'm so confused. I feel like I'm never enough. Nothing I do is ever enough. Nothing I say is ever, they're not listening to me. What is going on? Maybe I'm not being clear enough. Maybe there's something wrong with me.
And now imagine any time, right, you feel upset about something where your emotions, your feelings are completely valid. Maybe you just got yelled at by your parent. You had a really negative experience and you're feeling upset. But now that same person, this authority figure, your caretaker, is telling you that it's really not that bad, that you should be grateful because think about all of the good times that we have, right? I think sometimes this is also a really common experience when adult children of narcissists maybe try to make amends in the relationship and move forward. Part of that, I think, is talking about the trauma that you endured, which brings to the surface some of their more negative behavior. But doing that kind of forces them to take accountability, which makes them very uncomfortable. And so instead, I think they'll just discount a lot of that negativity and instead sort of force you, pressure you to remember the good times and all of the positive things that they did for you. Again, just invalidating your feelings. And that regret, I feel like that is something that so many of us experience, whether it's regret surrounding the nature of our relationship with our parents and kind of how it all turned out. But for me personally, I think I experience that regret when I think about the amount of time and energy, these really kind of once in a lifetime moments in my life, you know, my teenage years, things like that I sacrificed for my parents to be the person that my parents wanted me to be, that my narcissistic parent wanted me to be. And I can't help but feel sometimes so regretful that I voluntarily missed out on some of these experiences that I'll never be able to recreate, that I'll never be able to have in my life for the sake of this relationship that is now non-existent. So the regret, I think, is very real, even sort of ruminating on things that you've said in the past, experiences that you've had, and wondering, you know, thinking back to being in that environment and questioning, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently so that the outcome was more favorable? It's so applicable.
To create this sort of psychological buy-in so then you can maintain the status quo. For people in narcissistic relationships, it's not as though they're waking up saying, this is a hellscape, I want to get out. They're getting up saying, I'm so confused. I feel like I'm never enough. Nothing I do is ever enough. Nothing I say is ever, they're not listening to me. What is going on? Maybe I'm not being clear enough. Maybe there's something wrong with me. So that's the confusion element. So it's not like everyone's saying, I want to get out of this. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of experiences together. So people, again, and they're also confused because there's good things that happen and bad things that happen. And that's what creates, like I said, this thing called the trauma bonded relationship. So people might even be able to say, like, there's something about this that isn't okay, and might even be able to articulate, these are the problems in the relationship, but the idea of leaving this relationship fills me with an absolute sense of panic.
Would a narcissist play to that insecurity and that history?
Well, the narcissistic person created the insecurity, and they will, because the narcissistic person is an expert tactician, right? Because that's what they bring to relationships, is tactics. And so they are very expert at knowing, like, your wound is abandonment, piece of cake. So if you say, I can't do this anymore, I'm out, the narcissistic partner will say, okay, cool, let's call it quits. You'll be like, oh, that's not what I wanted them to say. I wanted them to say they were going to fight for the relationship. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's so interesting because, and part of the reason narcissistic people are so successful is because they're so socially perceptive. They have no empathy. Social perceptiveness and empathy are not the same thing.
I think because of the nature of your relationship with your parents, the closeness, how well they know you, because they've been around you since the day you were born, this is something that's really easy for a narcissistic parent to exploit, where they know your strengths and your weaknesses. They know your biggest insecurities. You are vulnerable by nature as a small child, and so they know the things that make you uncomfortable, and they can play on those later on in the relationship to maintain maintain control over you to kind of get you to do whatever it is that they want you to do.
Social perceptiveness and empathy are not the same thing.
What are they?
Social perceptiveness is kind of being aware of reading the room, understanding what people need, understanding what makes them tick and what they want, and then strategically giving it to them to keep them on the chain or keep them in the position you need them in. That's not empathic.
Can they take feedback, narcissists? Like, do they listen to do they?
No.
They can't
They
take feedback.
really don't. They cannot. The only time a narcissistic person may tiny bit listen to feedback is if it comes from somebody with much, much more power than them. Because narcissistic people are very hierarchical climbing creatures, right? So let's say they're getting it, the CEO's up here and there's some sort of VP level person here and they admire the CEO and the CEO's giving them feedback. They will listen because they want to be him. They want to be with him. They want to be next to or her or them, whoever the CEO is, right? So they may get some of it, but they're still going to hear it as, or there'll be this noise that's blocking them out from hearing all of it.
So it might be compliance
Yes.
as a means to an end versus them actually going, oh, okay.
No, yeah, they're not integrating it into, they're just sort of, and they might even think like, God, this person's such a dick. Like, I could do their job so much better. They're so lucky they got there. I'm going to get there. But they also envy this person. So they are listening. But like you said, it is exactly what you said. It's compliance versus this sense of, let me listen to this. And I can promise you what this person's going to do if they're in a relationship. They're going to go home and rage at their partner because they had to have that feedback session. They're going to find a more vulnerable target because they can't attack that CEO. And they'll go and find someone else to rage at, a partner, a person on the subway train, a family member, friend, someone else.
I heard this word gaslighting. Again, it's a word I've heard a lot, but I'm not necessarily really clear on what the definition of gaslighting is. But from reading your work, I hear that narcissists gaslight people a lot.
A lot, right.
What is gaslighting?
So gaslighting, at its simplest, it's a power play, it's a form of emotional abuse, and it's a tactic. Gaslighting is predicated on a relationship that's ostensibly characterized by trust. So that's why strangers can't gaslight you in the same way as an intimate partner, a trusted colleague, a family member, even a person with expertise, like an attorney or a physician could gaslight you, right? Because there's a presumption of trust. So you're going to listen to the gaslighter. Initially, what the gaslighter will do is they will doubt the gaslighted person's perceptions, experiences, memories, even reality. That never happened. I never said that. You're making that up. We never went there. So now this person's a little confused because their reality is saying, yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. So initially, a person will fight back against the gaslighter. They'll say, we absolutely went there. Do you want me to show you the pictures on my phone? Then we go to the next step of gaslighting. The gaslighter doesn't want to see the pictures on your phone. They just want to overpower you. This isn't about evidence. This is about them overpowering you. So they'll say, look, here's the pictures on my phone. And then the gaslighter won't say, well, you're right, we did go there. Instead, they'll say, oh my gosh, you are the most petty human being I've ever met. Is this what it is? You're just going to go on your phone to find the pictures to prove something to me? Is that what this relationship is? I don't know that I want to even be in a relationship like this. Now, this poor person who's being gaslighted is thinking, I just showed them the pictures to prove a point, and now I'm the bad one. And so they trust this person. So they think, well, maybe I am doing something bad. Maybe I am being petty. But gaslighting doesn't happen once. It happens over and over and over again. It's an indoctrination process that leaves the gaslighted person utterly confused, completely out of their minds, doubting themselves, and they start to believe the critiques. The gaslighter will tell them things like, you're crazy, you're stupid, you don't remember things right, maybe you have dementia. Do you think you should be in therapy? You might need to be on medication. Like, by the time the gaslighter's done with someone, they have lost all sense of, they don't trust themselves at all.
And I think this is just compounded when you're dealing with a parent-child relationship because of the innate vulnerability of children. For the first significant chunk of your life, your most trusted, safest relationship is that with your parents. You don't really think to question their motives. You want to believe them. And yet for so many of us who grew up with a narcissistic parent, so much of what they say can directly contradict our own perception of reality. It's confusing enough for a grown adult who has life experience and perspective, maybe of other healthier relationships, to enter into a relationship with a narcissist and feel confused about the behavior that they're on the receiving end of. Now imagine you're a child who was brought into the world being exposed to this kind of behavior. It's seamlessly integrated into your life, and now it's kind of your normal. It's so much easier to develop that self-doubt, that lack of self-trust when someone, this authority figure, your caretaker, is calling into question your own perception of reality, your own recall of past experiences.
I want to make sure I've given enough advice to someone who is currently dealing with a narcissist. All of the things that you've said to them ring true. They can relate to everything you've said. Are you telling them to get out of that situation?
No. And it's something that's very, very important to me, is that people don't feel compelled that they have to get out, because they can't always get out. And I think if we put that forth as the only pathway, then people who can't get out might say, "That now what? I'm just supposed to sit here and suffer?" And the answer to that's no. In my book, what I talk about is this idea: if you're gonna stay in a relationship like this, right, for whatever reason, it could be a family member and you still don't want to fully walk away from your family of origin. It could be a long-term marriage and you've got minor children, or there's financial or cultural reasons. It might be a job you've had for a long time and you're not financially in a position to step away from it. It might be a friend you've had a long time. Your reasons are yours. And so I always say to people, you must never feel pressure unless it's dangerous. Let's take dangerousness out of the equation, right? You don't feel compelled to do what people say. It's going to be harder. If you stay, it is going to be harder because you're still being exposed to their manipulative, invalidating, unkind, unsettling, destabilizing behavior. However, the first step, the key step, is what I call radical acceptance. This is not going to change. This is it. There is going to be no someday better. It's not going to get better when he gets a promotion. It's not going to get better for her when the kids grow up. Your mom's not going to soften with age. This is it, folks. You now know what this looks like. It is not going to change substantially. The behavior is not going to change substantially. So if you're going to stay in it, your workarounds are going to be based on knowing that. So you have to have very realistic expectations. Now, what happens though is when people initially have this level of radical acceptance, they have a tremendous amount of grief because a lot of hope was keeping them going. I thought it was going to get better someday. I thought maybe that someday would come. The staying means that someday is not going to come. And so that means that once you radically accept, you're not as surprised by their behavior, because a lot of people get exhausted from the number of times over years or decades. They're like, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they did. I'm like, can we just stop that part and say, of course you believe they did it. In fact, we could have set a clock by the idea that they would have done it, by the fact they would have done it. That's a big piece of this. But the grief of letting go of what you wanted these things to be, that's its own process, and grief takes time.
I think that's why a lot of people make the decision ultimately to go no or low contact, because it's not something that's going to change. And, in my personal experience, I remember sort of holding out hope throughout a number of different experiences for the relationship to take a positive turn, kind of a step in the right direction, only to be disappointed by behavior that I could have expected based on past experiences. And I think there's something about understanding and accepting the fact that you can't change people. People will only change if they want to change in their own time, that can be sort of definite, where you understand, okay, maybe things aren't going to change, because if this person is unwilling or unable, things are going to stay this way. And then you have to ask yourself, is this behavior that I'm willing to expose myself to, what toll does this take on my mental health, on my mental well-being? Is it worth it? And unfortunately, I think for a lot of children who were raised by narcissistic parents, it's all too damaging, because now you're trying to navigate life as an adult, taking on all of the responsibilities that at one point you didn't have, all the while playing catch up, trying to achieve these really crucial developmental milestones that we sort of missed out on throughout our childhood because we weren't in an environment conducive to allowing us to experience those milestones. We're not in touch with our emotions. We don't necessarily have a firm grasp on our own perception of reality. That self-trust needs to be developed. It's like Most kids go into adulthood with a solid foundation that they can sort of build on top of. But when you're raised in a toxic environment like this, you have to kind of demolish everything that has already been built and start completely new. All the while, you're juggling these adult responsibilities. And so to add on top of that, navigating a relationship with a narcissist, accepting the fact that it's not going to change, that you're probably going to be exposed to a lot of the same manipulation that you were when you were growing up, it can be just too much to handle sometimes. And so sometimes you do have to make the decision to distance yourself from that relationship and from that person, even if they are a parent.
Superman has kryptonite. And in the context of the Superman story, kryptonite is the thing that he's kind of allergic to, the thing that kind of, defeats his very strong set of powers. For a narcissist, what is their kryptonite? What is the thing that, makes them fall to their knees and that they run from? But when they see it in a person, a trait maybe?
I think that for a narcissistic person, there's a couple of ways kryptonite can show up. I think that the kryptonite that we could bring into it is not engaging with them anymore, right? Not giving them the satisfaction of the fight, not getting into the mud with them. But we have to be strong in the face of that because they're going to want the fight. So they're going to push and they're going to push and they're going to push and try to poke us and make us take the fight because they're really good at fighting.
I've said before that dealing with a narcissist, a narcissistic parent even, is a lot like dealing with a bully when you're in elementary school and they're picking on you and all they're doing is looking for a reaction out of you. In a way, you can kind of compare that to narcissistic supply, where they want the fight, they want you to engage, and so they're going to antagonize you. And if you do have to stay in a relationship with a narcissist, whether it's a partner or a parent, one of the best ways to kind of shut them down is to deny them your reaction. Because if they no longer have supply from you, if they are not getting the reaction out of you that they want, then where's the fun in it for them?
What about authenticity? I saw you talk about that once, that they don't like people that are authentic.
They feel threatened by people who are authentic. So, and to show up as your authentic self in a narcissistic relationship can actually be, I'm going to say dangerous. I put dangerous in quotes. It's not like they're going to beat you up, but they're not going to have it, right? Your true self, your authentic self, they're going to mock it. They're going to have contempt for it. They're going to, if you're not solid in that authentic identity, they're going to attempt to dismantle it, which is why many people struggle. If they don't know they're dealing with a narcissistic person, they may struggle with authenticity.
How do you even know who your authentic self is when you're a child? I feel like so many of those developmental years is when you start to figure that out. Who am I? What do I like? What do I not like? What's important to me? And when you're in an environment where there's a person who's telling you the answers to all of those questions instead of allowing you to figure them out for yourself, you don't necessarily have a firm grasp on your sense of self, on your authentic identity. Not to mention, you might have been viewed as an extension of your narcissistic parent instead of an individual on your own. Whether it was the way that you were spoken to or the way that you were treated, it can be really easy to feel like you are not your own autonomous being. And so now, all of a sudden, maybe going into adulthood, this idea of authentic sense of self is completely out of left field, and you have to start developing that a little bit later on in the game. And I think lacking that authentic self when you are so young makes it exponentially easier for your narcissistic parent to manipulate you into becoming the exact version of you that they want you to be, the version of you that serves them the best.
What is the most important thing we haven't discussed that we should have discussed?
I would say the most important thing that we've discussed is that I don't want people to leave this conversation thinking it's all doom and gloom. People can take themselves back from these relationships. This isn't like sort of some terrible deterministic destiny that I've been through a narcissistic relationship, so I'm never going to be authentic. I think what's remarkable is once people learn about this and they're taught about this and the dynamics of it, and they're given permission to call abusive behavior what it is, they're able to slowly but surely start coming back into themselves, no longer shaming themselves for having a need or a want or a feeling or a hope. People do heal. And I've seen remarkable stories of people coming back from familial narcissistic abuse, marital narcissistic abuse, long-term committed relationship narcissistic abuse, workplace narcissistic abuse, and out of it have come out so much wiser, stronger, finally enacting their creative selves. I really want people to leave this episode knowing all the dynamics, but that not only is healing possible, it happens all the time to people, but it's work and it's not an easy process.
Self-discovery, at least for me, has been such a crucial part of my healing journey, where I definitely think when you grow up with a narcissistic parent, it's hard to connect with that sense of self, with your identity, because for so long you took on the opinions and wants and needs of another person. You prioritized a parent over yourself, and so it's hard to know who you are. And so throughout this process of realizing your trauma and understanding the behavior that you were receiving, you can start to ask yourself, okay, who am I? What do I like? What's important to me? What do I want to do with my day or with my life? And you can let go of a lot of that guilt that comes along with making mistakes or asking for help, admitting that you don't have all of the answers, things that maybe in the past you would have been shamed or punished for. You start to realize that they're just normal parts of the human experience. And understanding all of that and really feeling it, I think, is so conducive to self-discovery and in turn healing.
So thank you for that. Thank you for shining a
good
light
to
on this
know.
subject matter, and thank you for all the millions of people that you've helped through your work. It's really
I
important.
love that. I mean, I think that that's such an interesting take on it, is that we do sometimes do these things that are narcissistic, but we're not even because we are narcissistic, but to even recalibrate those behaviors. I think the better we all can be, the more we're fortified should someone who has these qualities come into our life, that we don't give up on ourselves. And I think that that's the more good we can sort of create in our universes, that the bad's going to happen. It's the nature of life, but we'll be stronger in the face of it. So thank you.
That was a great episode. That was a lot. I was so happy when I got the notification that Dr. Ramani was on Diary of a CEO, because understanding more about narcissism and mental health in general has been such a focus of my life for the last 6 months or so. And it kind of seemed like perfect timing, because everything that I put out, whether it's videos on TikTok or my podcast, I do it all with the hope of informing and providing insight from the perspective of someone who was raised by a narcissistic parent. It's so confusing and frustrating, and being on the receiving end of a lot of these behaviors, so much of that is what motivates me to continue to share my experience and to do deeper dives into the research and to share everything that I've learned along the way, so that so many of us who grew up in a toxic environment like that can really reclaim our own narrative and our sense of self. We can learn how to trust ourselves again and to trust in our own perception of reality. We can understand this behavior, understand that it's not personal, and then work to become better people ourselves. So that's kind of my goal with everything that I do. And I was so happy to sit down and watch this episode with you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope my insight was valuable, and I love this podcast. Stephen, I would love to talk to you one day. Dr. Ramani, I would love to talk to you one day. Even Maisie Williams, whose interview first inspired me to start talking about my experience online. Everyone involved in this is really great for just bringing awareness to this topic and to mental health in general. So thanks for sticking around. I really enjoyed shooting this video. If you enjoyed watching it, please let me know in the comments, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and if you want more, let me know. I will be back with another reaction video. Bye.